Good morning, everybody. This is a very special crowd that's here in Stockholm, and then we have tons of you with us online. And I just said here this morning that it feels like the real dedicated ones are, of course, up on a Monday morning to follow us online via stream. But then we have the core troop who's actually made it here physically in Stockholm. It's snow chaos, and I think it's been on order to work from home, but there are non-compliant people here that's not working from home. And me and Niina, we also had a bit of travel drama trying to fly in, but we are here. And we are tremendously excited about spending this morning together with you. And we will discuss and present the results from our Nordic Business Ethics Survey 2022. And when we were preparing for this event with Niina, we said that this is just the start. I mean, we have so much data, and we have highlighted some things in this report, and it's available online. It will be mailed to all of you as well. And we want to encourage you to be in contact with us and just send an email, send a message if there are areas that you are missing from the report. And today, if there's something where you think like, hey, okay, but why didn't you look at this? It may be that we actually have the data, but we haven't just sort of put it in the report. And together with DLA Piper, we are, during the next 12 months, going to have the Ethics Talk lives as well, diving into different topics and trying to lift up new things as well from the report. So please reach out if there's something you are thinking about that's missing. And a few words about Nordic Business Ethics. Who are we? I guess those many of you know who we are. We are almost 4 years old, and we started with the survey in 2019, and because we wanted to have a fact-based dialogue about ethics on our Nordic workplaces. Both Niina and myself have an in-house background. We have worked in large corporations, and we felt that we think it's much better. We think we don't have issues, we don't have problems, that we are Nordic companies, we have sound cultures. It's of course common sense to speak up and raise issues, and that's something all employees intuitively do in our Nordic corporations. And we felt that that is not really, or we knew based on our own experience, that that's not the case. So we did the first survey, and in our first survey, I think our main observation was the prevalence of misconduct. We could see that over 80% of all respondents said they had witnessed something unethical or illegal at their workplaces. And this is a trend that's been stable, I would say. And even Niina is going to dive into the observations of unethical conduct. And we can see even an increase. And we will discuss what we think about that. Then the next year, 2020, we redid the survey, and we were planning to have a physical launch during spring 2020. That obviously did not happen. And then during the autumn, we had a virtual launch with over 600 persons participating. We had Andy Fastow, the Enron CFO. He was having a keynote. And in 2020, our main observation was actually the sharp increase in employees that did not intervene. So we could still see that there are unethical conduct at our workplaces to a pretty high degree, but we do not intervene. And we also, I think our sort of really interesting finding was the reason for not intervening. And there, sort of the key theme for 2020 was, that top managers, they didn't care, line managers didn't think it makes a difference, and employees or line managers didn't think it was their job, and employees didn't think it was going to make a difference if they speak up. We also have, Niina's going to dive into that as well, we have some very interesting findings about actually speaking up. And I would say this is where we see some of the most interesting trends compared to 2020. So with that said, we have to highlight our faithful partners who's enabling this survey. It's a lot of work that goes into the survey, and we are working with the Professional Survey Institute. Niina's going to tell you a bit about how the survey is set up. But we have had Forensic Risk Alliance, FRA, have been with us from the start. And I would say without FRA, we could not have done what we have done. So I think that is a special thanks to FRA. And then we have the Finnish-Swedish Chamber of Commerce, who's also been with us from the start and really helped us a lot with the marketing and getting the message out. Then we have DLA Piper, who we've been working with during the last couple of years, who's helped us not only with the survey, but also with these Ethics Talk Lives that we're going to continue with during the next year. And then we're super happy to that we can be here with IMM, with the Swedish Anti-Corruption Institute, who's helping us to arrange and facilitate this discussion today. But with that, Niina, something I forgot, or you want to talk a little bit more about how the survey actually has been done?
I think that, as you can see from our agenda, so we have coming up a very interesting discussion on the survey results. But first, we're gonna talk a little bit about the background and the key findings of the survey. And by the way, very good morning also from my side. Really nice to see you all here. So as Anna mentioned, so this is the third survey, and if you remember the first one, we had only included Finland, Sweden, and Norway in the scope, and then in 2020 survey we got the Denmark involved, and this year we are very happy to announced that Estonia is in this year's scope. When you are reading the report, which by the way is, published as we speak in our website, so feel free to download. There might be a few typos still we are gonna fix in, but the data should be correct. But there where we are talking about Nordic average figures, that will exclude Estonia. But in all the other figures, Estonia is part of the data. And here maybe just to mention with the viewers also, we did earlier this year also a standalone survey to Greenland, which was a really nice project. But we did that with a little bit different methodology. So there was only 3 companies from Greenland participating. So the data is not comparable, and that's why it's not in this report. But as you can see, just like in the 2020 report, we have 1,000 responses from each of the countries. So the total N is 5,000, which is quite nice. And this year we are also publishing the sectors. So you might want to look at the sector list and perhaps also identify your own from the data. Sorry, I'm mixing here. Yes, and then if you look at the background, so here we have represented basically all of the different sectors. So I think when looking at the results, it's always important to understand that where does the data come from. And here you can see that about half of the responses are coming from the private sector, about 30% from the public sector, and then the rest is from the publicly listed companies and non-profits. And you can also see that there are all sizes of the corporations, so all the way from, very minor small companies into the big entities. This year we are also looking at the results from the age perspective, and you're going to see very interesting insights when looking and comparing the responses based on how old they are. But yes, just like last year, the survey is in three different phases. So in the first part, we are going to talk about foundations of an ethical working environment. Then in the second part, on the observations of unethical behaviors. And then in the last one, the ethical standards of an organization. And let's first have a short look on what the first section looks like. So, Anna.
So, ethical working environment. I mean, here we ask about, how does ethics matter, basically, and also ask the respondents to rate themselves, like how ethical do they think their companies are, and also compare and relate that to other companies. So do we think we are more or less ethical than other companies? And I would say, I mean, here it's probably a no-brainer, the 80% of respondents that say ethical behavior is important. That sort of average level is on the same levels as previous years. But if we here dive into a country view, we see that Estonia, 95% of the respondents said that an ethical behavior at work is important to them. If we then look at Denmark and Norway, that was 84 and 83%. We look at Finland, it was 78%. And if we go to Swedish employees, it was only 74% who said that an ethical working environment is important to them. So this is, we can see pretty big differences, especially if we look at then we have Estonia as a newcomer, and we see this coming in some other questions as well. And if being here in Stockholm, I think it's of course should be a concern to us here that Swedes actually sort of rate or has the lowest rate. So there are 26% of the respondents that from Sweden that don't really think ethics is important. If we then go to the second sort of key takeaway that we have highlighted, it relates to respectful and equal treatment of employees. And this is one parameter that we are sort of specifically focusing on, and also sort of respectful and equal treatment in relation to applying similar standards to both top management and everybody else. Research, other research, academic research is very clear on that one of the most significant parameters for identifying if an organization is prone to misconduct is if employees in general feel that top management, there are different rules for them. The same standards doesn't apply. So this is a good sort of parameter to actually understand how prevalent an organization is to misconduct. And this is something that's really highly valued, and I'm going to just dive into in just a second how these standard applying of similar standards look like in Nordic organizations. We also ask then, about the reality. So how is ethical behavior? We have examples actually of ethical behavior as well. How is that demonstrated in reality? And there, if we again aggregate, 20% have selected sort of the very well, so the best response, saying we think ethics has demonstrated very well at our workplaces. On the other hand, those that have selected very poorly, they are 10% of the respondents. And if we take very poorly and poorly, it's 20% of the respondents that says we think our organizations are behaving very poorly or poorly. So again, a kind of dual message, that, at least for us, signaling that there are also quite a lot of unsound organizations out there. And here, one thing that we wanted to highlight when it comes to how ethics is demonstrated, 30% of line managers says poorly or very poorly. So line managers are quite squeezed, and we can see that also in other instances that they are perhaps most skeptical and prone in this area. And then finally, the final key takeaway that we have in this section is on how we view ourselves in relation to others. We have picked up the top manager percentage here on the slide, where 25% of top managers believe that other organizations are more ethical than theirs. And this is, of course, an interesting observation where I would say each organization should have as an ambition to actually set the standards in their industry. But here, top managers knowingly say, no, more other companies are more ethical than us. So just some highlights from this section. And then this one, as I mentioned, respectful and equal treatment of employees, the most valued parameter of the working life. But again, if we break it down on country level, we can see that Sweden stands out. So in all other countries, the respectful and equal treatment is the most the one that the respondents selected most frequently and said, yes, this is important to me. In Sweden, it was actually salary and benefits. It was just a 1% difference between this and salary and benefits, but I think it was it's still interesting to note that Estonia here, 96% of the respondents selected respectful and equal treatment. Finland 91, Norway 85, and in Sweden it was 79% of the respondents, while the salary and benefits were selected by 80% of the respondents. And before handing over to Niina to really dive into the observations, I just wanted to quickly mention then this, what I would say is a key parameters for us that work with these topics in organization, to measure how employees perceive that standards are applied. Are they equally relevant to everybody in the organization? And here it's the first bars, leaders and other employees play by the same rules. We see that we are doing fairly well here. Over 70% of the respondents in all countries actually agree with this. And here we see an improvement from 2020. So that is a good thing. However, we could turn it around and say roughly 1 in 3, 30% of the respondents do not really feel this. So we have room for improvement. This is at least one of my favorite parameters when trying to assess the risks for misconduct. But Niina, I think I'll stop there and hand over to you for the observations.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, so I think this is always the most interesting part of the survey. So what are actually employees and managers observing at their workplace? Here we have just gathered a kind of short summary as a short teaser. So our key findings this year were very actually surprising also to us. So over 50% observed activities that they perceived being against the law. When we look at the individual unethical behaviors, favoritism was a kind of a most common theme, which was a quite big rise from the previous years. On the other hand, the speak-up culture has perhaps gone better, because if you remember the figures from our previous surveys, they have been much higher. And here we just raised Finland's results, because we can see that in Finland we have still work to do in the speak-up culture. 35% of the Finnish respondents say they didn't speak up. And as a new question for this part, we also asked about the retaliation. And here the worrying news is that 55% of the top managers perceive retaliation for not speaking up, and 37% is the average for the Nordic figures. But yes, so the first question we asked here, that have you observed activities that you feel from your perspective that could be against the law, against the code of conduct, against your corporation's policies, or activities that you feel that could be unethical, even if it's not stated in your organization's code of conduct. And if you remember this question from our previous surveys, we used a little bit different way of asking this question. Previously, it was just simply a yes or no question, or simply choose from the list if you observed or not, and the figures were much lower. This year, we gave the opportunity to select whether you have observed once, or more often, or repeatedly these type of activities, and as you can see from the bars, we have quite high numbers here. So actually 53% of all of the respondents said that they have witnessed activities that are against the law, 68% activities that are against the code of conduct, 69% against the company policies, and 71% said that they've seen things that are unethical, even though we don't have a policy that would say that it shouldn't be it's against a policy. So this is maybe a very good or this is a very interesting finding that we are definitely going to talk about today with our guests. Also, when we looked at these figures from the perspectives of the roles, line managers were the one group that most often witnessed these activities. So, for example, every second, 2/3 of the managers had observed the activities that are against the law. So this is quite interesting. And as a general observation, we noticed that younger people are much more likely to observe any of these activities than the older generations. Well, then if we go into the details of these observations, then what we have. Here is the list also from the previous years. And if you remember our previous studies, the disrespectful behavior has been our number one observation until now. And this year, the favoritism and nepotism got into the first spot in here. And here we can see that there is actually quite a huge increase. If we look at the total number of respondents, so 81% of all of the respondents said that, we have witnessed some kind of, or at least one type of an unethical behavior from this list. And this was actually 82% in previous studies. So the total number of the people didn't increase, but the amount of various kind of unethical behaviors has increased a lot. So people have selected much more options from this list. And is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think one of the key thinking that we have here is that at least it has maybe become a more normal for us to recognize these situations where we feel that is a kind of an ethical dilemma. And of course, I think this will be one of the key takeaways from our side, that we want organizations to look at this list and look at the previous study results and ask yourselves that, what could be those activities in my organizations where people could actually perceive that this is some kind of an unethical behavior. Then we also kind of dig into the details regarding, what did people do when they had observed the misconduct. Again, we used a little bit different methodology to ask these questions. So in previous studies, we have asked from every single observations that what did you do? This year, we made it more simple. We asked the respondent to think about the last time he or she observed any of the above-mentioned behavior and what was then the result. And here we can see that actually reporting the incident to a line manager was the most common option. And then also not speaking up was there the kind of second most popular option, but also confronting the person directly had quite a lot of responses. So I think this is a good news in a way that maybe we are starting to be more open to have those difficult conversations with the people who are involved. Here we actually looked at also then the results from the age perspective. And here you can see that only 13% of the employees who are from 18 to 19 years old did not intervene. So this would tell us that, you know, huge variety. Most of the young people are willing to raise the issues, and much more willing than the older generation. So only 34% of the 50-plus-year-old did not intervene. And you can see that there is also interesting picture with the women and men. So women are less likely to intervene when they observe something unethical. And then we asked that, you know, what are the main reasons for not raising the concern. And here, as Anna was mentioning in the beginning, so we still have those same reasonings for not speaking up. So, you know, it's not my business. It would not make a difference. I didn't want to be a difficult person. And then also as a fourth reason, there is the concern that the speaking up could jeopardize my job. And actually, this is something that if we look at the total statistics, this is one of these reasons that have actually increased. So it was 9% in 2020, and now in this year, 15% says that I'm concerned that it could jeopardize my job. Then I mentioned that there is this new interesting figures regarding the retaliation. So I think overall, this was a yes/no question. Did you experience retaliation, yes or no? And here you can see the country-specific figures. So Denmark and Finland and Norway are here the countries where it was more often to experience this retaliation. And then in the lower picture, you can see the difference between the roles. And there is a dramatic change if you compare the top managers and line managers to the specialists and employees. So over half of the top managers and line managers actually experience retaliation. And this is definitely something very, very interesting that we're going to talk about also today, later on. But that's about the observation, and then let's look at the last part.
Yes, so quickly we're going to spend a few minutes on just reviewing what's our section, the ethical standards of an organization, and then we will go into a bit of more of a discussion format. But here we are classifying the ethical standards of our own organization. We look at whether there is a dedicated ethics and compliance function, whether there is a code of conduct. We ask for a whistleblowing channel. We also ask whether there is a dedicated person you could raise your concerns to, and then about training. So, you know, some of the basic elements of a compliance program that we would assume that an employee should be aware of, right? We don't assume that you know, ordinary employees out in the organization is knowing about the risk assessments and whatnot. So we have selected these 5 elements that we say constitute sort of the core of an the ethical standards. And here we do have some interesting key takeaways again. We see that 47% say that, yeah, our organization is having a code of conduct. And then you can think, okay, 47% good or bad. We do actually think it's pretty bad, especially when we dive into, you know, the type of companies and company size, because we can see that I mean, roughly the same amount of employees in stock-listed companies, they say that they have a code of conduct, or equally half of the employees in big public companies, they don't know, they're not aware of whether their organization has a code of conduct. And I think, Niina, the name of Niina's company is Code of Conduct Company, and I'm sure you've made many of code of conducts for stock listed companies, and I think most, I mean, it's a basic requirement, and most have that on their webpage at least. But I think we've said in the sort of pre-marketing of this event a bit provocatively that that's a wasted effort, seriously. If half of your employees are not aware, or they think you don't have a code of conduct, it's not a good document. So that's sort of a wake-up call to all of us. How do we anchor our main principles for ethical conduct in our organizations? Then if we look at trainings, there roughly 39% says that they receive some form of training. Again, in our mind, a pretty low figures, not a lot of increase here since previous year, a little bit, but not dramatically. And here again, doesn't really matter between companies, type of company. Where we see a bit of a difference is actually in terms of role. So if you are sort of a top manager, they more frequently say they are being trained, but then the lower you go in an organization, the sort of trend declines. So we see also, we said that during our first survey, that ethical business is all about training our ethical muscles. And we see a huge need still to continue actually getting the message out to the employees. We also have one of our favorite questions around compromises, and I'm going to invite Hayaat to the stage in just a few minutes to talk more about ethical compromises. And that is something where we still see high shares of employees who says that they have had to compromise. For various type of reasons, the most common reason is actually to benefit the customer. So, and I'm wondering if that's sort of the mean justifies the end, so to say, that we think that, okay, it's for the customer, then we have to tweak a little bit here. Yes, yeah, and we see that there is a bit of a slight difference between the code of conduct and your personal standards. We have asked this now for the second year, and still think it's interesting to ask about, whether basically the company's policy is enough. And we see here that a bit higher amount of employees or respondents say they have had to compromise their personal standards, while 54% says, okay, they've compromised the code of conduct, alluding to that maybe, the company standards are not as high as our own. So then going into a bit of the details. So here you can see, as I was saying, on the breakdown of the public sector, the different sectors, that it's not sort of a huge difference. And also we see a slight increase, and we don't have last year's amount here or shares, but on how comfortable we are in intervening, or how well we know about what should we do about it. So is the awareness out there? Should we use our whistleblowing hotline, or what to do? I mean, 2/3 sort of know what to do, but that's especially, considering the EU whistleblowing directive and so on, we would have expected perhaps to see a bit higher share here, that organizations would have communicated more around what to do. So we see that one third do not really know yet how they should react. A positive thing, so we should end this section on a positive note, right? A positive thing is how unethical conduct is disciplined. Here we see an increase compared to last year's. where we are then seeing that organizations are doing something and employees are also aware of that something happens. So maybe we will see a change in this when the respondents say they do not report because they don't believe it will make a difference. We still see that is one of the most important factors. But maybe we will see a shift here if organizations get better at actually disciplining and taking things seriously. So maybe that will drop. But then sort of moving into the compromises. So here, as you can see, very high shares of the respondents that have had to compromise. And it's over 70%, so over two-thirds. And also an interesting sort of age division where younger generations are more likely to compromise. So you can see going from 78% who have had to compromise to 37% of sort of those who have been in the working life for a long time. We discussed this with Niina, and our one explanation around this is actually not that younger generations are less ethical, but actually perhaps they are more, because they feel something that they have had to do is a compromise, while somebody who's been in the working life for 30 years, they do the same thing, but they don't see it's at the compromise. So I would say we're having a big question mark. So what is going to be the most cited result from this survey? What are we going to talk about the most during the upcoming 12 months? And one thing that at least I personally think we should talk about is whether our organizations are prepared for what could be an inflow of and really a speak up culture that's sort of growing in organizations, because we see younger generations, they identify more ethical misconduct, they are more likely to intervene, they feel they have to compromise more, and I think, Niina, you said as well that you had digged up from data that they feel most uncomfortable as well, but still intervene. Which is an interesting when those of you who know me and, well, Michaela who's in the audience, we talk a lot about the discomfort and the ethical struggles and that it should be difficult. And it's interesting to see that younger generations perhaps have realized this. It feels difficult, but we are still doing something about it. So, yeah, let's see if our organizations are prepared for this shift that perhaps we will see even more employees speaking up and really demanding organizations to live up to higher ethical standards.
So that was it, and we have the question mark. So we would be very happy to hear your thoughts now or after this event. So feel free to send in the feedback form, kind of your questions. That what are the questions that you would like to be answered in our forthcoming Ethics Talk live sessions. But next, I think it's time to move on to the discussions. We have three stars here with us, and we will dig into the three different topics. So we will first talk with Hayaat about the ethical compromises. Then we will discuss with Viktor from FRA about the observations of unethical behaviors, and then lastly we will discuss with Riikka from DLI Piper about the retaliation. But Hayaat, please join us on the stage to discuss the ethical compromises that Anna just kind of highlighted. So based on the results, as Anna mentioned, so 58% of the respondents said that they have compromised their personal ethical standards. So is it a high or low number, and what are your thoughts on it, Hayaat?
I definitely think it's a very high number to start with, and also given that we see that 80% also feel that ethics is something that they value and think is important. But when I read the survey and the statistics there, what struck me was that it reminded me also of an article that I read earlier this year. But that was more, they framed it as about compromising your moral standards. But this is kind of the same. That was from the Harvard Business Review, where they kind of launched and discussed the term of causing moral injury at the workplace. So the problem there was that they see that a lot of the workers or employees, when they feel that they've had to kind of cut corners to achieve certain results, what happens is that they kind of develop a moral injury at work where they feel that there's a lack of sense of justice. So what they saw that was that people actually value things, as we saw even in this survey, things such as being respected at work, not being discriminated. And that's something that values even more than, for example, getting a higher salary or a different position. And they compare that even to the fact that what they see in the US, kind of like the big recession now, when people are actually leaving the workplace, not only because they want more flexible working hours or stuff like that, but also in terms of feeling that they've had to compromise their own moral standard or their own ethical standards. So I think that's something that is very interesting for the corporations and different organizations here when it comes to, for example, the younger generation. If you want to keep the talent in your organization, then you of course have to also prioritize this, because as we see it here, the younger generation also tend to value this even further. So I think that's something that organizations need to take into account, that ethical compromises might actually result in talent leaving rather than staying.
Yeah, exactly. What about then the reasons? So based on the survey results, the two main reasons for the compromises was, first of all, the customer, to benefit the customer, and the second one, the line manager. I was just obeying the orders from my manager. So what does this tell us?
Well, I think, we were discussing a bit earlier also, is it like because we tend to deliver more than necessary to our clients that we go above and beyond and therefore compromise our ethical standards, or if they're just asking too much? And I think there might be a mix there. Historically, we see, of course, a lesser or a more acceptability when it comes to, for example, cutting corners or using unethical ways to conduct business or like enter into markets or retain business. But I think what's interesting is that even the customers now say at least that they prioritize ESG. They want to see good governance. They want to see responsible business. But I mean, when push comes to shove, is that actually what they are prioritizing? So I think that's something that we need to look into more. But I mean, there is a lot of research there also when it comes to, it's not just about how we're getting to the results, but also, our way of getting there. So I think that's something that we will also have to, of course, look into even more.
Yeah, and I think there it's important to not only think about our customer, we want to benefit our customer, and that's why we compromise, but how do we cause unethical conduct, for example, at our suppliers?
Yeah.
Because we are their customer. And if we then, as you say, when push comes to shove, if it's the price that matters, because we want to have cheap prices with our suppliers, we really squeeze them. And then at the same time, we expect them to work with human rights and have compliance programs and educate their employees in ethics. I mean, we may be forcing our suppliers to be unethical, and I think that's a discussion we're not really having. Yeah, I don't know.
Ready to have.
Yeah.
But I think that what you're addressing is exactly what we're also seeing when we're discussing with different corporations here, is that, even for larger companies that invest a lot of money into having, grand compliance departments, even then we see that, when it actually comes to practice, it's not always effective. And I was definitely reacting to that low number of individuals who are also aware of the code of conduct.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we are. Like, is this something just a paper product that you want to demonstrate because there might be requirements from the public, from your customers, your suppliers, that you need to have a code of conduct in place? But is that something that's implemented? I think we will need to see that, given the fact that the younger generation will also be demanding that more.
Yeah, yeah. And that's one thing, Niina, I was thinking about. We should dig up from the data, the awareness of the code of conduct per age group. That could be interesting to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What about then this other reasoning? So not listening to the orders from the line manager. Is there anything we can do about it?
I mean, that's a that's a very tricky situation. I think that many people find themselves exactly there, and perhaps even, you know, the people who are just entering into the workforce, and you might not be in a position of power where you can actually say, you know, that I'm not okay with this, or, you know, let's do this instead. But I think what we all could do is kind of early on, like in any relationship, kind of make clear, you know, this is what I'm okay with, I'm comfortable with this, I'm not comfortable with that. But also, I think, you know, coming from a law firm perspective, you know, always providing a solution also, you know, kind of preempt and see, you know, can I propose a different way of reaching the same goal? But that puts a lot of work on, you know, the employees or the workers. So I think, you know, that's just difficult. But also kind of, you know, trying to get allies within the same group, kind of, and talking to. But I mean, this is something that we also see, you know, prior to having the Swedish legislation when it comes to whistleblower. Many of from the public sector also raised that, you know, they were afraid of raising concerns because they also feared retaliation, but also experienced retaliation in a larger context than previously. So stay strong, and I'm happy to see that even though it's uncomfortable, many people are still, you know, taking that step.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any
Thank you,
questions
Hayaat.
from the audience at this point?
Questions, comments?
There is one question.
Yes. 6.
Intressant att se om denna funkar. I think it sucks up the sound instead of the opposite. Now,
Yes.
I just read a survey that was published on speak up culture and retaliation in the public sector, more specifically hospitals. So I was wondering, the results were appallingly bad, shockingly bad in 2022. So I was thinking, have you analyzed, I know it's always very frustrating because you have so much information, have you analyzed if there are differences between the public sector and the private sector when it comes to understanding the code of conduct, speaking up, retaliation?
Yes, partly we have, but it's sort of in snippets. But we have gotten that information or request already whether we could actually have a report only on the public sector results. So yes, I don't know, Niina, if you remember some of the ones that we have. But for example, if we actually have a slide on it, I'll just quickly. Oh, sorry. This one, right? So here we have a comparison by sector just on the formal elements, how aware they are of code of conducts or whistleblowing channels or trainings. So there we can see, for example, when it comes to whistleblowing channels, 38% say they have a channel in the public sector, which of course is very, very low. So, but they are low numbers overall. Yeah. No, that's what we think as well. No, but I think that's something we should perhaps take the time to do, to have like a one-pager on the public sector.
Yeah, we have the first proposal on the next talk, Ethics Talk live discussions. So thank you, Mikaela, and happy to hear your other thoughts as well.
Yes, but I'll invite Viktor to the stage as well while you are thinking about tricky questions. But should we can put a more relevant background. No, there. So Viktor, we wanted to dive into these observations of unethical conduct. With you and specifically this illegal conduct. I mean, we asked during the 12 months, and you could say once, and then from once to repeatedly. But if we take everybody who said that they have at least once observed unlawful behavior, it was 53%. I mean, what's your take on that?
I actually had to reread that a couple of times to make sure that I got it right, because it's really startling, as I think everyone would agree, that we're there in 2022. And as Niina was sort of previewing, comparing that to 2020, when there was only 8% that responded the same. I understand that the question was slightly different, but nevertheless, I think the comparison is stark. And I think really should give us all a moment to pause and think about, what that means and the potential impacts, and really kind of think about what has happened in the last 2 years that might explain that difference. And I think we can all agree that a lot has happened. But I think Niina also kind of alluded to it. It would be really interesting to maybe take that question and dive a little bit deeper to understand what people perceived as illegal in their minds, because there's obviously very different flavors of that. So that would be really interesting. I think you can look at it from two different lenses. The first being from a more positive lens, that perhaps, as some of the survey results alluded to, we might be better equipped as employees to identify these things. We might be more aware. There's more coverage in media and so forth. The other lens is the slightly more negative one, which again goes to some of these survey responses that 50% had to compromise their ethical standards. And I think the reality is that there is an enormous amount of pressure on employees and organizations to deliver to their customers, as you were saying. So in many ways, I think in the sort of post-COVID and the current economic situation that we're in, there is in some ways kind of a perfect storm for fraud, because there's opportunity, people can rationalize it, and there's again pressure. So I think what the answer is, I'm not sure whether it's the former or the latter or a combination of both, but either way, the finding is startling.
Yeah, and it's also if we think that even, and yeah, we need to dive into, okay, what do employees perceive as illegal? I think that's relevant, because we don't really know exactly. But anyhow, if you, as an employee, I walk around at work and I'm thinking that is illegal, what we're doing. That's bad, right? It really does something for the culture as well, even if because we know technically there are things that are not right. I guess the Ericsson case was sort of, the prosecutor here is not going to continue that investigation, because apparently it's not illegal in Sweden to do what Ericsson did. Apparently the DOJ disagrees, but so I guess we shouldn't view illegal as you are sentenced in court. Right. But yeah. If I'll just take up the slide here, this one here. So we of course see that these more leadership related issues like the disrespectful behavior, favoritism, nepotism are most frequently observed. Do you think this is something that we can say, yeah, okay, that's it's not so bad, it's not illegal at least? Or what do you think?
I think this appropriately falls into the gray zone, which I know that you guys have written a book on, and this is when it gets a little bit tricky, right? It's I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. Having illegal activities is comparative to some of these unethical activities. There might be different consequences, perhaps, from a sort of individual perspective and at an organizational level. But I think these types of unethical activity can really have a far-reaching impact on the culture, as you were saying, as well as the work environment. So in many ways, I think it's a bit of a slippery slope, that if you have these types of behaviors prevalent in your workplace, it might just be the tip of the iceberg, and it might be a situation where this might actually be indicative of other larger issues that are taking place, and perhaps that aren't getting through to the right channels because there are these issues of favoritism or other things. So it's alarming as well. And from my perspective, and I should say FRA, especially for the Swedish people in the audience, the acronym is not the same as Försvarets radioanstalt. We sometimes get that question, and that is for the non-Swedes. That's the sort of intelligence agency in Sweden. So no, we are a consulting, a boutique consulting firm. But sort of the last point on this slide, from my perspective, is quite alarming. Looking year on year, the comparison as well, because this is really problematic, and I think we've all seen this. You mentioned the Ericsson case, but I think that hits it right on the head there.
Yeah, but should we stay a little bit at the last line here, because this is also something where we see a dramatic increase. If you see that 13%. In 2019, then in 2020 it was 18, and now we have 39% that says they have during the last 12 months witnessed, giving, asking, receiving bribes, which is and you see Sweden is 50%. You already alluded to it, Viktor, that it's a concern, but do you think we are more corrupt or something else driving this dramatic increase?
I'd be interested in maybe others' thoughts as well. I don't know that it's that we're more corrupt necessarily. I think it goes back to sort of getting the culture right, which I think is so important. And I think what tends to happen perhaps in Sweden is you have this sort of naive approach to ethics and compliance that, we are ethical, it works within the sort of confines of the Swedish border, but then once you go beyond that, you might sort of have that same blind trust in employees or your organizations or subsidiaries and so forth. So maybe that's where you get yourself in trouble. I'm not sure, but this is frightening. Yeah,
and I'm looking there. We have the mic. I'm wondering if somebody else wants to.
Yes, we have here a hand
to comment upon this. Yes, Maria.
Speaking now, I think the biggest difference now from 2020 is actually that people started working from home during the COVID. So is any reflections on that, working from home, not being in the office, having that kind of the office environment, the company environment in the office, is that really something that makes a big change?
I think that certainly could be a factor, right? If you compare 2020 to where we are now, that's one of the biggest changes, right? In that we're all working from home. And I think it was, I was listening to Richard B. Strong talk about this, and I think he termed it proximity bias, right? That you get removed from as you were saying, from your workplace, and that creates a sense of disconnectedness, and you're not really getting a chance to bring or see people in the office and have those conversations. So I think that might very much be part of it. But what do you think, Anna?
Yeah, I think earlier this year I had a hunch of we probably see less cases because we don't see each other, we're not in the office, we don't hear things, so we're not sort of unofficially controlling each other in the same way. But we don't see that from the results. There are, as Niina was saying, overall the same level, but then the instances, the type of misconduct that has been noticed has increased dramatically. So I don't know, we still seem to be able to have a view on each other, even if we're working remotely. And I think this is very interesting. So yeah, I guess it's too early to say, but my assumption was that we would see less because we are not at the office. The data doesn't support that assumption.
But you're given a different opportunity, maybe, not being in the office, feeling the culture of the company in the same way. So
yeah.
And I think that if you don't have a good culture and you are disconnected, then you might get more emotional with all of these observations, and that might also be one explanation.
Yeah. Any other reflections on the observations? I don't know if we should take another mic, if that's a bit. We have mic number 5 here as well. Is that better? But any other comments?
There is the one hand.
Sune.
Yeah, hi. Just to, when we're talking about this, I would be very interested in understanding how did you identify the people who responded to the survey? What was the selection? How were they presented with it? Just to understand a little bit more on how to interpret these quite interesting figures that we see.
That's a good question, and sorry for being too quick in the overview. So we have used external service provider for the data collection. We changed the service provider from the previous survey, so it's a different company, but more or less same methodology. So there is this panel where basically the only criteria for the respondent is that he or she needs to be 18 years old and in the working life, but otherwise it's like the full kind of population of Nordics. So we use this feedback service provider.
And it's the same service providers that are used for, I mean, any type of official polling, basically. And here, how they have selected the respondents, because obviously if there is a respondent, they look at the working life in general and see, okay, what is sort of the typical demographic of the working life, and then make sure that our responses are in relation to that typical working life population. So we don't only have 19-year-olds and 65-year-olds responding, and that's also why you see, for example, a lesser share of employees from public listed companies, because the reality is that most work in the public or private sector, if you look at employees. So this is really a general view on employees in the Nordics. Yeah, Lova.
Thank you for a really good seminar. Do you have any reflections on why Sweden has the highest number in all these categories?
I would like Hayaat to respond to that question if you... Yeah. Yeah.
Work? All right. Yeah, we were discussing this earlier, and I think when we're looking at, for example, favoritism and nepotism, 75% have observed that, and I think that's something that we definitely recognize. We had the EU barometer, for example, from earlier this year in July, and we saw kind of the same structure there. We also saw that 43% of Swedes also believe that corruption has increased. But I don't know if that's because corruption in fact has increased, or like you were saying, Viktor, because we read more about it, we discuss it more, and then we tend to perhaps also recognize it more often now in our interactions, or for example at the workplace. But what I'm definitely surprised is the last there when it comes to giving, asking, and receiving for bribes. That is an extremely high number. Yeah. And I don't know why that is, but definitely something that we will be discussing more at Swedish Anti-Corruption Institute.
Yeah, and we actually have also more data for that one, so we will later publish this bribery-specific report where we actually have even more questions that are not yet published here. Yeah. But I would agree with this one that, you know, the Swedish are just more aware. They are not more corrupt, but they are more aware. And just like the younger generations, for example, I have here these figures that if we, for example, talk about sexual harassment, 62% of the employees who are 18 to 19 years old have observed sexual harassment, where the percentage is only 19 for 60 plus or 25% for 50 plus. So it doesn't mean that, you know, there would be much more sexual harassment. Or then if we want to take another example, which is very different, and this is adding personal expenses to your expense claim, and here it's 46% of the 18-year-old who has observed it, 60% from the 20 plus, and only 21% for 60 plus. So there is like that the younger are observing this kind of behavior 3 times more often than the older ones, and maybe it's just that what we perceive as being unethical, it varies. Yes, and it's always a subjective kind of.
Now, just to comment also further on that, I mean, for the past 2 years, looking at the newspapers, you know, the radio channels, we've been seeing the discussion on corruption and different scandals, both from the public sector, from the private sector, that has definitely been dominating. And we also saw that during the pandemic and even now the aftermath. And we know that from previous history that corruption tends to also increase in times of crisis. So therefore, I'm not too surprised because I was expecting corruption to increase, but I don't think we've seen everything yet. But I mean, for the coming 2, 3, 4 years, perhaps, things will start coming up.
Yeah. So, I think this is really food for discussion throughout the year, and I think alarming still. And I guess confirming that we who work with this, we know that there are quite a lot happening in our organizations, but the awareness perhaps on the top is not on the same level. I do still think that boards and top management want to believe that their organizations are great. It just happens somewhere else.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Viktor,
Perfect.
for
Thank you.
sharing your thoughts. And
Yeah.
let's definitely continue this one. And yes, please go ahead while we are introducing at the same time our third guest here. But go ahead.
One question on where misconduct actually happens. If we think about the private companies, which can be quite big, and global companies and listed companies, I mean, misconduct can happen across the board, not only in Sweden or in Finland. Is it somehow addressed in the survey? Because I don't recall how the questions have been framed.
There is the sector-specific analysis, and I don't think we have it now here, but you can see at least the differences between. Actually, we have there the one pager where we have the top 3 scenarios for various or different sectors, and there, for example, it was evident that in the private sector, this nepotism and favoritism was higher than in other.
Yeah, my question is about if person face the misconduct, it happens in Sweden with the person who's responding in Sweden, or it can happen in other place in the same country. Because I think private companies and listed companies, they're quite broad, and this can happen in other places, though person still can report that this happens in my company, for example.
Correct. Yeah. So this is from an employee perspective. So the employees are based, for example, in Sweden. But then I'm, of course, if I'm working abroad, I'm based in Sweden, I work internationally, then, of course, that whole sort of that place. So we have not only asked, okay, corruption sort of in Sweden, but it's from your perspective as an employee. Have you witnessed this?
Yeah, and this is the exact question. So it asks in your organization. There is no kind of limitations in terms of where in that organization.
Yeah, meaning that if we look at the statistics, we can apply it not only for the local Sweden, Denmark, Finland, etc., but it also can go broader actually.
Yeah.
Yep.
And actually the question where we what we ask first, that where in which country do you work? So it's not like that these are all Swedish respondents who have responded to the Sweden questions, but they are working in Sweden or in Swedish companies.
Great. So Riikka, should we then dive into retaliation? What happens then when we observe or raise concerns?
Yes, so this was actually a new question. And by the way, when you're reading the report, you can see there's these small stars, meaning that we have there some new questions. And we thought that, at this time when we have the whistleblowing directive and everything going up, so having a question about the retaliation is a very good one. And actually just in the airplane, we thought that, we should ask also that, what type of retaliation did you experience? Because, for example, if we compare that one of the key highlights here was that the top managers observed the most retaliation. But when we look at the reasons for not speaking up, the top managers were not concerned at all that the speaking up could jeopardize their jobs. So there is definitely the much or the kind of a concept of retaliation is a very wide, and here it would be very interesting to understand what are these forms of retaliation that the respondents have faced. And we can only guess now because we didn't ask this, but we will definitely add this to the next year. But Riikka, what are your thoughts on this high retaliation percentages?
I was quite surprised to see the number. I guess we all were. But if we think about the retaliation rate, and on the other hand, management is not not seeing it as an important necessarily to report and well, it's all at least. Should we? Yes, thank you. Okay. Yes. So if we think about the results, so the rate of the retaliation and management not being that willing to report of misconduct or wrongdoings, my thinking was that should we still kind of repeat the obvious, like what we all have already heard before, that if we actually want to create a genuine and effective speak-up culture, it is the management who is at the end of the day responsible for it. They should be setting the example for all employees, and they are the ones who would be responsible for that the employees do not get retaliated. So in the light of the survey results, I think there's still room for this discussion, even though it sounds a bit obvious. Of course, why managers experience retaliation, maybe it has something to do with their position and the expectations of them being the most loyal to the company. That could be one reason. But as you mentioned, the whistleblowing directive and the implementation of the directive is ongoing across Europe. I think now is a good time for the organizations to actually kind of assess the state of their speak-up culture, really from the roots, and not just thinking about whether we have the channel and whether it meets the requirements, but how do we actually face and act and behave when an issue is raised within the organization? Do we listen, and are we supportive, or do we give the impression that okay, maybe your concerns are not addressed properly, or do we give the impression that there might be consequences if you speak up?
But Riikka, you work with labor law, right?
Yes.
And was wondering, do you think we will see in the future, sort of top managers going after their companies for being retaliated against in the light of new regulation coming up? And do you already see that in your practice?
Actually, no. I also have a sense that companies still have some work to do in preparing for these new regulations. I'm not expecting to see kind of directors going after to their organizations. Yeah.
Okay, so well, let's see then, because I guess then the law has more sort of it's has this scaring effect, but perhaps not sort of real tangible impact then in terms of actual legal cases.
Yes, maybe.
Yeah. So based on the survey findings, the comfortability to speak up did go down compared to the previous years. So people are less comfortable to speak up, and I think this was interesting when we looked at actually yesterday these younger people findings, because younger generations were more likely to feel less comfortable, but also they were more likely to speak up in a way. So this is very interesting that they feel uncomfortable, but they do speak up, and then the top managers are the ones who feel the most retaliated. So I think this is an interesting the whole story. But how could we get down this or how can we increase the comfortability, or do we even need to be comfortable, or should we just accept that it is uncomfortable?
Yes, I agree. Maybe we should somehow try to lower the threshold for speaking up. Of course, we need kind of continue educating our employees and speaking about what can be considered as a wrongdoing or a defect in our business, where are the risks, so that the employees actually recognize when they face a wrongdoing, because maybe you don't encounter any wrongdoings, but once in your career. So employees may not be that comfortable and familiar with the risks that are in their businesses. But also, if I think about it, I would be a whistleblower. What would I think? First of all, I would think that, okay, what I'm seeing, is this something real? Is this something wrong? Am I just imagining this? I'm maybe not that familiar with the situation. Then my thinking would be, okay, if I blow the whistle, do I start a huge and massive investigation? And what if I'm wrong? It's embarrassing. What will happen to me? So maybe we should kind of create a process how to manage those fears and thoughts. To be, maybe some solutions would be to be very open about the process. What happens if you make a report, and what is expected from you, and what about what happens after the process and the investigations? Can we somehow support the whistleblower?
Any ideas from the crowd here? Yeah, on where do we have the mic on the whistleblower and retaliation, and these contradictions that we see.
Thank you, Karin here. Good morning, and thank you. This is a fantastic seminar. I've learned so much, and one thing that I can't let go, and that is that people are not aware of the code of conduct. So I would just start there, because if you don't know that you have a code of conduct, and if you don't know what's in there, then I mean you can have whatever whistleblowing processes and retaliation, I mean whatever, but if you know what's in the code of conduct, then you know that you should act even if you don't have all the facts, which a whistleblower rarely has the full picture, but you might have that little puzzle brick that can then, for a compliance officer, make or break the investigation. So to me, that's something that I think that I hope that you will continue to discuss, and that I think that really this sector should also discuss internally. Why is it? And maybe I was just thinking, maybe we haven't created the business case for the code of conduct. Maybe that's what's missing, because of course you understand that if you are sexually abused or harassed, that's a personal issue, but it's also an issue for the organization. So I think there's thank you for making this study, because it really enlightens us, all of us here. So that, but really, I think it's also, I mean, I so much agree with all what you say, Riikka, but it's also, I mean, fundamentally something that we are missing here, and that is awareness. Everybody, it should be 100%, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I was shocked as well, to see some of the figures. Any other thoughts? Any thoughts? What could be the retaliation? I think, if we would have asked the question, what do you guys think that are the typical forms of retaliations that people perceive as being a retaliation? Any thoughts, Riikka?
Yes. So it can be take different forms, many forms. From my perspective, what we see is it's kind of very common behavior at the workplace, something that happens all the time, regardless of whether someone has blown the whistle or not. It's social isolation, not talking to someone, some kind of inappropriate behavior, sometimes regarded as workplace bullying. So something that happens all the time at the workplace is very, very common. It can be very, very subtle, but still. So it doesn't have to be always unfair dismissal or not
yeah, and obviously
promotion.
the top managers are not afraid of the dismissal, but some other issues, I think.
Yeah, but I agree with, because we are social creatures and we want to belong to the pack, right? And then if somebody blows the whistle and goes outside of the pack, it's like we are perhaps not deliberately excluding that person, but perhaps not really bringing into the group. And these are difficult behaviors, right? And then we think about, we implement a policy and we have an e-learning, and then we put the link of the whistleblowing channel online, but then we have to deal with behaviors and feelings and these kind of more psychological aspects. So I think that's where, at least personally, I feel, it's a real struggle for those that work with formal compliance programs that in many cases originate from a legal perspective, and then suddenly you should bring in more this behavioral science into that work, because ultimately at the end of the day we have to remember that it's about influencing behaviors, right? We want employees to behave in a way that is ethical, but of course, obviously also legal. But I think that's sort of a minimum baseline. But it is about behaviors and not about the code of conduct per se, right? We have it online. But thank you, Riikka, so much. Niina, anything else that you want to highlight? I would be really happy to take some more comments from the crowd.
Let's give the word to the audience if you have any comments or questions or proposals for us on where to dig in next when we start the in-depth situations. At least I think that this data, this is just the kind of starting point. Well, first of all, we have just I think digged the data from a very tiny kind of amount, and next year when we will have the 5 different ethics talk live stream sessions, we will be able to dig into the very much of the details. And any thoughts you have, questions, comments, proposals, feel free to address those, because then we will use them really. And I think in terms of what the whole report will serve, I think these are just perceptions. It's just a kind of one view of kind of perceiving things. It's not the kind of a truth of the Nordic ethics, but I think how we can use this data is to continue the conversations within our organizations. So, I hope all of you will use this data to ask your organizations the questions that, what do you think is illegal, is unethical behavior? Where are the kind of a gray zone that we are living at? What do we mean with the retaliation, and what kind of a speak-up culture we have? So use the data to address the questions and maybe find the more specific issues and dilemmas of your organizations.
And I also I was a bit triggered by Karin's business case comment, because if we look at these conducts here, and how we can, as Niina was saying, let's use this data to facilitate these discussions. One way I would use this is to sort of, as Viktor was saying, to see them as a breeding ground for misconduct. I think most of us are familiar with the fraud triangle that you alluded to as well, with the rationalization and opportunity and pressure, which I think exists in most organizations. And if you have this sense of unfairness and disrespectful behavior and so on, it is a slippery slope. And I think if we compare then sort of the prevalence of unethical conduct, and then we have this association of certified fraud examiners, who they are making a study on sort of the report to the nations on fraud in organizations. And I think at least last time I checked, they had assessed that sort of the cost has increased. So I think previously it was roughly 5% of the top line that they assessed that's sort of eaten up by misconduct in organizations. And I think it was up to 8% sort of that they assess. And if we say that we have this kind of, breeding ground for unsound conduct, it has financial implications. It does. It is really, really hard to prove and to have that exact causal link and go to the board with an exact diagram, and that's sometimes what's expected from us, right? But I do think, obviously, if there are personal expenses to the expense reports and we are sloppy with the figures and whatnot. So it has a financial impact. And if we can sort of combine this data, take in from the ACFE data as well and say, yeah, it eats up the top line, right? And we all know how much effort we put into increasing the top line. But increasing the top line with 8%, it requires a lot of effort. So we can put a bit of effort in making sure that the top line isn't eaten up as well. So I do think we need to create that business case. I'm a fan of investigations. Those who know me know that that's really what I think. Investigations, your whistleblowing cases, they are a gem for getting to the gist that sort of your culture and proving to the rest of the organization what the leakage is. Some organizations have more public scandals that are sort of out there, but all organizations have issues, and we need to work with sort of getting the facts and making sure that we are not naive, because the fact is that things do happen in our organization. So if we work with the premise that, hey, we have very, very few whistleblowing cases, everything is okay, we should really go back to this data and ask ourselves, so, okay, but is my colleagues, are they even aware of our code of conduct? Have they been trained? Do they know what they should do? And if we can say yes 100% to all of that, maybe we can feel a bit more comfortable. But yeah, a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And this picture there is no organization who would have, 0 in every row. So I think it's good to have everyone a discussion, what does this mean? But yeah, I think, the time is flying and we have just a few minutes left. Any final thoughts from the audience? Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really nice to have you here, everyone in the room and everyone on the line. And as said, the report is available in the nordicbusinessethics.com, and you'll also get that directly to your email after the session. And we appreciate you being here with us and are looking forward to your feedback as well.
Great. So thank you for everybody who joined us online, and we hope to see you again. And as said, please give us feedback, and we're happy to dive into the data and to continue the discussion. So thank you all.
Yes, and very special thanks to our great partners. We would not be here without you.
Thank you.